Hello and welcome to THR Presents. I'm Tyler Coates, an awards editor at The Hollywood Reporter, and I'm thrilled to be joined today by actor Austin Butler, the Oscar-nominated star of Elvis. Also joining us today is cinematographer Mandy Walker, who also earned an Oscar nomination for her work on the film, as well as choreographer Pollyanna Bennett, who worked with Butler to help him embody the iconic Elvis Presley on screen. Austin, my first question is for you. When you landed this role and you knew that you were going to commit to it, was there one element of playing Elvis in particular that really scared you?
One.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
I don't know if I could choose just one. It's how it all sort of fits together. This sort of it feels like you're spinning a lot of plates at the same time. Between the internal life, the external life, how he changed over many years, how his voice changed over many years, how he physically moved over that time, and that's where the brilliance of Polly Bennett and Mandy Walker comes in because very very early on we were all working together and being able to the craft these things together, and also, I mean, Polly and I, she was not only the person that I looked to for movement advice, but she was my therapist, she was my rock, she was my best friend out there, and she really yeah, the amount of late nights that I would call her just going, I feel like I really need to talk right now. And she was always there for me. And then Mandy was there for my very first meetings with Baz, and figuring out how to dance with the camera, and so all of that together, I'm so honored to get to be here with both of you right now.
Mandy, you've worked with Baz so many times. I'm curious, when you signed on for this project, what were things that you talked about, and what were things that he was excited about showing and depicting, and what were things that you were excited about bringing from your perspective?
Well, I was excited about the whole thing, and right from the get-go. And we start talking about story and script, first off. And then for me, like almost straight after we'd had our first discussion, and this is really early, like about 9 months before pre-production, I was at Austin's workshop, as he said, and I was there with my Leica camera running around taking stills and looking at angles of him. And as he was performing, just starting to look at the lenses and what was working, and then showing Baz. And our discussions were, one of the most important parts of the camera language was to dance with Elvis and to be able to fly with him, and when he flew, and then to be able to be very elegant and observational when there was heavy drama going on. And and we also had to reproduce the concerts, like for the 68 NBC comeback special and the first Vegas show, and even Russwood. There's existing footage that everybody can see, and Baz wanted to represent it exactly. So that came, that was one of the directives for all of us. And then, I'll just say that what was great is that I then would start going and sort of being a fly on the wall when Polly and Austin were starting to rehearse and starting to look at the performances. And then we spent a lot of time together, watching and then getting on stage with Austin and looking and getting our stills cameras, and I got my camera crew in there, and I had my crew learn the songs and learn the choreography so that we were dancing with him and all in sync. And Polly was amazing at that, because she would be kind of guiding us through what was going to happen, and getting us, call us in when they were rehearsing something we need to come and see. So that was the camera part of it.
Polly, how was, I guess my first question for you, Polly, would be, how did you get connected to this project? How did it come your way?
Gosh, how did it come my way? I think I'd worked on Bohemian Rhapsody with Rami, in his transformation to become Freddie Mercury. So I think there were whispers of my name in the air, and maybe some fell on Austin's ears and some fell on Baz and the other producers' ears. And suddenly I got a message going, "Can Baz have a phone call with you?" And it was one of those wild conversations where he was on a ferry in New York and I was on a street in Edinburgh, having a conversation that wasn't about Elvis at all. It was just a kind of lovely chat, and then it turned into waiting, not hearing anything, and then suddenly being in New York and meeting Austin for the first time after spending some time with Baz. So I think that's how it came to be. I think that's what happened.
So once you kind of were there, what was your first step in kind of learning how to teach someone how to move and dance like Elvis?
I guess the biggest, of course, the first thing is Austin's kind of reported that it's absolutely terrifying for anyone to go, okay, overnight, off you go, you're going to be Elvis Presley. And I think part of it was just to try and sort of eradicate all of the stuff around what we think Elvis Presley does. The first thing people say is, oh, he moves his hips and he does that with his lip. And actually, when you spend a lot of time with the footage, what you see is not those things. And actually, after a huge amount of sort of research and spending so much time with footage and books and stories and anecdotes, and also looking at the history of what was going on at the time of Elvis's sort of rise, you start actually seeing that there's things underneath what you think it is. So Austin and I would always be saying, what is it actually? Like, what is he actually doing here? And what trickery is our brain doing on us because of what we think it is? So it's exactly that, spending a lot of time with material, and then as a kind of private detective, kind of being hired to actually kind of work out everything from where he's looking, how his breath is in his body, what we imagine his heartbeat to be doing at any one moment, as well as discovering what the costumes are doing, what he's singing, what lyrics he's singing. So we'd speak the songs as poetry, and we'd tap dance and swing dance and do lots of different things that kind of accumulated towards the fabric of Elvis's movement language, what he grew up around. So that's the very start.
Austin, you kind of talked about how finding the interior of Elvis was a major part of your job. And I'm curious, for any actor who plays a very famous person, how much of it were you trying to avoid impersonation? And as Polly said, kind of understanding while watching, footage of Elvis, what he was thinking that kind of motivated the way he moved or the way he would sing a lyric like that?
Well, I mean, first of all, just how Polly was describing there, it was trying to see everything as if for the first time, without any preconceived idea of who Elvis was or all the sort of concepts that we have around him, and instead just try to get down to the core first, to his humanity first, and so there was many different ways in which to approach that. And with a year and a half of time, there's many things that I tried that brought me straight to the external things, and then there was other things where I was focusing so much on his internal life that I lost the specificity of something that he may do physically. And so it was a constant sort of back and forth, and that's why having Polly there to be able to, I remember times where I'd look at, say, the Hound Dog performance, and I would want to get to very specific things, exactly the angle of his hand in a certain moment, or the angle of his head, or how he got up on his toes. And sometimes Polly would say, let's pull back. What does the music actually feel like? And so it would kind of take it away from those moments of wanting to get to the result, and instead kind of wiping that clean and go, what if you were to perform this song just the way that the music is moving you? And so it's constantly trying to get to why he does what he does, what it actually felt like inside of him, rather than what it looked like on the outside, or even you know, I mean, we spent weeks at a time where we weren't even necessarily looking at Elvis footage, but we were looking at all the people Elvis was looking at. So we would watch hours of Little Richard and just see what in the way that he performed, you know, inspired Elvis, or watching the way Howlin' Wolf sung a song, you know, and imagining being young Elvis down on Beale Street watching this incredible performer on stage and seeing the passion, and or Mahalia Jackson or Sister Rosetta Tharpe or whoever it was. We would go back to those and try to imagine instead what Elvis was seeing, rather than doing the thing of just looking at him and trying to go to him as the sole source in a way, because you're trying to somehow connect yourself inside to his entire life from inside his own perspective. Yeah, so that's some of it.
Holly, what did you do? Was that a lot of part of your research too, kind of understanding the influences on Elvis and what he may have taken from as a performer?
Yeah, massively. I mean, but that's from a kind of system that I guess I've developed with a lot of my work, specifically into movement coaching, which is with the kind of belief that we are all summations of all of our physical experiences up until a moment. So I did ballet as a child, so I still stand in first position, you know, whether or not I've done a ballet class in the last 6 months or not. So there are things that we accumulate, that we hold, that is both experiential and also emotional, and that's what we would do with looking at the performers that Elvis grew up looking at and seeing and experiencing, because those things are going to have an effect on how he hears music, or how he plays the guitar, or how he even sits at a piano. So actually, in spending time looking at the footage of those performers, or learning about when they were performing, as Austin says, imagining Elvis seeing them for the first time, we were able to take sort of little pieces from each of them and put them sort of in Austin's kind of secret tapestry as Elvis. So you know, there was moments like, and even with Little Richard, when we have the scene in the film of looking at how Little Richard performs, and I remember Austin in rehearsal, you were like, oh, I'd like to do that, and I was like, that's exactly what Elvis would have felt like, you know, because I was working also with Alton, who was playing Little Richard. So, and suddenly Austin was like, oh, there's some things there that's interesting, I want to do that. And so that was a really useful experience, hey, of how and why Elvis got to where he got to.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me, Mandy, I know that you, as part of your process of shooting and recreating a lot of the especially the televised moments in the film, you used a lot of kind of vintage cameras and things like that to achieve that authenticity. Did you also feel like you were kind of, I don't know, assembling kind of a postmodern take as a cinematographer in this sense?
That's exactly what we're doing. I mean, I had lenses made that would replicate the feeling of the period, and that would, you know, because I think a lot of people's references of the 50s and the 60s and the 70s are from watching film or stills photography. So I go back and research that, and I had lenses made for the 50s and 60s, and then anamorphic, we went in Vegas. So once he got to Las Vegas in the 70s. So as you were saying, and I put my 65mm digital camera inside a TV camera. So one of the housings of the old TV cameras from the period on stage in the set, so that it would be exactly on the right angle, and it could be in shot, and because we were always multicam. But like you say, like from that first the language of Train Spotting, then there is the language of the drama and how we represent, like you say, a postmodern. There's a lot of the way the camera moves with Austin that is not train spotting, that is more of a modern exploration and more to do with the drama of the scene and the emotion of the scene. For instance, when we do Trouble at Rustwood, you know, the camera in that concert would never be spinning around and looking down. But for us, it was to create that emotion for the audience of the kind of the chaos of the performance and how the audience were reacting, and putting the camera in the audience to see, and then going handheld to feel what it would be like there. So there's a combination of a lot of different language for me in each of those segments. But I think, you know, one of the, just going back a little bit too, is that I think what was great with working with Polly and Austin is that I also wanted them to feel comfortable with us being there. So it's that rehearsal and that sort of constant communication between all of us that, and we knew, you know, because Austin was so amazing, and he would be doing the same thing every time and for every take, that we knew when his hand was going to go up and there'd be a nice flare behind it, or we knew when he was going to slide and the cameras would move with him. And so that kind of time in pre-production, working through that so that when we were shooting we were all in sync, was something I've never worked like that before, and it just was really paid off, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like, Polly, you played a role in kind of choreographing the cameras too. I mean, all the moving parts that all three of you had to kind of maneuver is really fascinating. And I'm curious if Polly and Mandy, you especially, can talk about how the two of you coordinated on set and figuring out, you know, where Austin would be moving and where the camera should go.
Well, I guess that's kind of, it all kind of came from the rehearsal room. I mean, we were lucky enough, Austin and I, to have a whole studio to ourselves, and we would spend hours and many days in that room. And, you know, occasionally we'd have whispers of what was happening in you know, in the schedule coming up, and so we'd be like, well, now we expect at any moment Baz might walk in and want to see this and this, and Mandy and her team would be there, as she said, and you know, particularly Jason and Jedi would be there, her two camera operators, of which there are many more, but those two particularly, of coming through and sort of working and seeing how Austin and I had staged things, because there are, you know, we're referencing train spotting, which is when we're trying to do an exact replication of something that it already exists or is famous or well known. But there are concerts like Rustwood that we don't have any footage of, and so Austin and I would devise those around photographs and images and stories and anecdotes, and piece together what we felt was saying what was going on the page in the script. And so Mandy and her team wouldn't know that unless they came into rehearsals. And of course, then they came into rehearsals and they were able to, you know, all the complicated stuff, like I don't know what they're called, Mandy, but those lovely lights at the front of the stage.
Round rows, yeah.
Those at the front of the stage looking up, you know, there was a stunt involved because Austin had to go into the audience, so we had to work, you know, I remember standing around those lights for a long time going like this and staring at them and working out how they were going to work. And yeah, I mean, we have to have that dialogue cross departmentally, and this is why this conversation is so brilliant, because there's a lot of other people that go into these conversations, and this dialogue was so imperative to making sure that when we went onto the sets that we had communication strong enough to roll with whatever changes and whatever action developed on the day, because, you know, it's still filmmaking and nothing always stays as you thought it was going to be.
Austin, was it a little bit more freeing or maybe less daunting when you were kind of doing the performances that weren't televised, that aren't kind of seared into everyone's brain? And did it feel like you were kind of giving a little bit of your own spin onto Elvis, or did you try to avoid that, you know, feeling like you were Austin at all?
Well, how do I answer that? You know, I often think about that. Was it more freeing, and was it more fun they were both fun for different reasons, and they were both terrifying for different reasons. When we were approaching Rustwood, I remember it feeling very daunting because the options were so open that then you start, like you say, you start going, is this an Austin idea? Is this an Elvis idea? Is this a, and then you start to, you get somewhat of a skeleton of how, you know, we would imagine it may play out, and then and then perhaps it wouldn't fit with the music, and so then we just keep morphing it, and I mean, we would continually go back, as Polly was saying, to images and all the things that we weren't going to be able to do in the other performances, you know, because you have the stuff that Elvis did physically in Hound Dog, or what he you know, did when he was on the Steve Allen show, or whatever it was. But then you look at this kind of blank slate where we're able to go, this is the most punk rock version of Elvis. And once we embraced that, I think, I mean, Polly, you know, I'm interested to know what you feel now in retrospect, but it was so much fun. It was so daunting because of the fact that you're constantly coming back to, is this authentic to Elvis? And so it's less of a thing like you feel like you can perfect something, but that's also what's so exciting about it, because you kind of go, and there were certain moments in it where we kind of would say, you know, you'll do this thing here and then this here, but this middle place, you know, that just feel the music, just allow yourself to feel it. And so it felt more organic in that sense as well than some of the other performances where you know that you're kind of held within the framework of whatever you did physically, and that you're trying to use as a train spotter moment, you know. But they were so much fun. I think back to that Trouble sequence. That was such a blast.
Do you remember when we first did it? When we were first
Yeah.
in the rehearsal room for it, we were like there on a Sunday or something, and it was dead quiet in the studio, in the whole studios where we were working, and it felt like this really exciting day because it was the first time that, as you're saying, we weren't guided by a structure that was already in place. So it actually felt like the most creative experience of also thinking on behalf of Mandy and Baz, of going, what would look cool, like what would be a good camera move here, or I suppose if you did that over here, that's where the dog is, that, you know, the statue of the dog, or we need to make sure that, but where would the Colonel be? So we had lots of problems to solve, and I guess on top of that, just to not to speak for you, Austin, but just to elaborate on something you said, that all of these performances have a narrative through them, regardless of whether they're train spotting or a devised moment. And so it was also working through, so things exist as they look, right? But there's also Austin's performance underneath also had to change the manner in which certain gestures or things were done. And so that was a lot of work on top of something that already existed. So that was also an opportunity for freedom, to use your word, because he was having to kind of associate with what our story was, not what was going on for Austin exactly in that moment. Elvis, sorry, there you go. In the actual moment, if you see what I mean, he had to do more work to make that true for lots of other reasons. So there's a lot of it. The train spotting sometimes can be the most freeing, because as an actor rather than as a mover, but a mover when you're devising something probably is like the scene like Rustwood or the Hayride.
I think that's what, like you're saying, for me too, is that it's important, like I was saying, Baz is great at the storytelling really early on, to be able to work out. The same thing for me is that in those sequences, there's always drama going on in the background. You know, there's the performances, but there's also, you know, the Colonel backstage, or when Elvis is on the stage in Vegas and what the Colonel's selling him for the next 5 years. So there's that, you know, that storytelling is a great thing that I have to say, you know, that we work on with Baz in not just the train spotting, but also how the other elements are going to be harmonized within that sequence, and to not take the audience away from the performance by cutting to drama all of a sudden, but to how we keep that flow in there was like something that we worked on as well altogether.
Yeah, my last question for all three of you, and obviously the film follows Elvis throughout his life, and his look changed many times, his body changed, and I'm very curious how you thought about the way he moves throughout his life, and not just on stage but off stage, when he was getting older, and how that would look. And Polly, I guess we can start with you and Austin and how you approached that.
Well, it was kind of the first, I guess, when we started working, we looked at everything, and gradually, as you look at lots of different footage, you start seeing similarities, you start seeing the things that stay the same, and you start seeing new things that arrive in his performances as the years go on. So we sort of always looked at things as is being spoken about the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And then within those years, we're able to articulate, or within those decades, be able to articulate in which years certain moves started to exist on stage, or he started to wear certain types of things like a jumpsuit, or when he started doing karate, finding out those kind of like physical key points in his life meant that we had a kind of skeleton to pin certain moments on, which is sort of what Austin was referencing earlier and saying, oh, we can't use those moves here because that didn't happen until that performance that we're not doing in the film. But how do we get that in the best narrative serving way? So I guess we looked at all the footage for the sort of movement on stage, but then of course you start seeing what he's doing off stage and what he's wearing and who he's spending time with, or maybe how he's spending his time, and seeing things like the weight gain, why that's happened, investigating that, exploring how that sits in Austin's body and what things he had to do to take on the kind of the aging, I guess, as he is very different physically from Elvis in real life. So we have to look at that and try and work out how to make that happen in the most authentic way to Austin, not to try and replicate exactly what Elvis looked like or felt like. So lots of improvisation, lots of again, sort of going through the idea of weight and breath and eyes, and trying to articulate the difference in those different decades is probably the most sort of shortcut way to describe it.
Yeah, that's very, very well said there. I think the only thing I could possibly add to that, because that was sort of our process. Then the tricky thing is now we're filming out of sequence. So how do you lock into that placement? So thankfully, Polly and I had so much time ahead of time, ahead of filming to be able to explore all these things in a rehearsal room and feel what it felt like for Elvis to walk in 1976 as opposed to 1956. And kind of work our way through all these things so many times, but that by the time that we were on set, it had sunk into my bones in a way to where I wasn't having to consciously be thinking about things so much. And then there was little times where, I'd kind of look at Polly at the end of a take and she would give me something, remind me about my breath or remind me about something. And those things would just click in. And so for me, it was, in the makeup chair in the morning, watching all the footage from that, whatever period we were going to be going after that day, and listening to my sort of key audio recordings and whatever the watching home movies from that time period or whatever that was. And then Polly would come in while I'm still getting my hair and makeup, put on, and we'd talk through it and kind of work our way into that time period. And yeah, it was tricky, but so I really miss it. As we're talking about it, I'm realizing how much I miss being all together,
Well, it's that thing, is it, what you've just said about that kind of the looks across the room? That's kind of how it ended up being, of like we'd done so much work that I was able to go
Yeah.
at this, and sort of like a baseball kind of
Yeah. It's like
instruction to remind you of little things, because sometimes it's those really, really nuanced changes in physicality that can just bring you into the right space or the right decade or the right moment. And luckily there was so much available footage for us to steal stuff from that isn't necessarily on the stage. And I think that's important to recognize, that the movement work doesn't stop at just performances. It's everything underneath to enable those performances to come out. Because if you don't know who he is in everyday life, then how do you know how he might perform?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Mandy, did your process evolve at all when you were kind of tracking Elvis through the end of his life?
Yeah, definitely. And also, as I say, it was always driven by drama and emotion and the journey. And so, just like Austin was saying, we shot out of order. So I had, from all the meetings that we'd had all together, because we would have meetings with Baz that had art department and costume and VFX and Polly and me, and my team then would start to come in, and I just wrote copious notes from everything that he would say and every kind of cue that I had for emotion of each scene, and I would write it down. And then every week I would take my I had a document that had references of the time and references of stills that we'd taken during rehearsals, and then I'd set up, all the different color palettes within the lighting and look up tables, with color timing on set, so that, for instance, when we were in the 50s, we had different sort of color in camera, so that it was more kind of very specific desaturated greens and yellows and some reds, and very limited color palette that worked with the art direction. So I would just always remind myself about what we were doing, and also just have little notes and check in with Baz in the morning and say, this is the scene that the camera isn't going to move very much, this is what we talked about. And so we'd just follow through with that. But I think that's the great thing about having, a team like we were, that we really put the work in early, so that when we got onto set, we were all in sync,
Absolutely, yeah. Well, that is a good place to wrap up, I think. Thank you again to this team, and congratulations on all the honors that have been coming your way. Austin Butler, Mandy Walker, and Pollyanna Bennett, thank you again for joining me for THR Presents.
Thanks, Tyler.
Thank you.